Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Document Truth. I'm very excited today to be joined by Frosty Wooldridge to discuss overpopulation. Having cycled around the world on his bicycle, Frosty has had a very unique view of our planet, which has opened his eyes and inspired him to dedicate his life to raising awareness on some of the most pressing issues of our time. Frosty has kindly shared with us his 10-part series, Overpopulation in America, Accelerating Growth Consequences. This series specifically provides us with insight into the effects of overpopulation in America and what we can expect as our numbers continue to increase. Good evening, Frosty.
Dalton, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you and all of your listeners. And hopefully, one of the things that I speak about when I talk to colleges and conferences and political groups is that you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't know what you don't know, then you can't take any action on it.
Right.
And so what I'm trying to do, and it's my intention in giving interviews, both radio and personal interviews, and also television interviews, and as well as all the writing that I do and the books that I write,
yes,
is to create knowledge, create understanding, create comprehension, so that when you know what I know, you can then take action.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell us? Could you give us some of your background and tell us what led you, to this insight into overpopulation? How did you get to this point?
Well, as a matter of fact, yes. So back in 1973, I became a teacher. I was a math and science teacher in Denver, Colorado, and in the summer I had 3 months off. And each summer I had very little money because you don't get paid very, very well as a teacher, even today with commensurate education and talents. And so I started riding a bicycle. I rode my bicycle across America, coast to coast. And in fact, I've done that 11 times now.
That's amazing.
And I also started bicycling around the world. And by the time I have gotten 6 continents under my belt now, and by the time I got to China back in 1984, I was astounded at the impact of the sheer numbers of 1.3 billion people. And then, of course, got to see the same thing in India, and then the same thing in Bangladesh, where the population explosion became so critical that these countries have become victims of their own numbers. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I from just a regular bicycle and a young man, seeing all these sites, crossing all these continents, and going through all of these countries, it dawned on me that the human race is in a lot of trouble.
Yes.
Because whether it's a trouble of China or trouble of India or trouble of Indochina or trouble of Africa or even the trouble in America, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And I hope that each person listening understands that this is not about race, creed, or color. Mm-hmm. And during these last 40 years of my travels around the planet, I've seen it get worse. And I've also scuba dived in all the oceans of the world, and I've seen the plastics that started in 1965 become a full-blown nightmare across the oceans. You've heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, 1,000 miles off of San Francisco, 30 to 60 feet deep, size of Texas, 100 million tons of plastic. And humans are adding 3.5 million more pieces of plastic every day. And in fact, on average, there are 46,000 pieces of plastic floating on every square mile of the oceans around the world right now. And then you can imagine all the plastics that are under the water. So I got to see this firsthand back in 1984, and that's when my life changed. And so what I'm hoping to do and have been trying to do for over the last 30-odd, 40 years is to alert Americans and all, every country on earth. I would love to give my program at the United Nations. I'd like to give it at the joint session of Congress, because the slideshow alone would sober anybody. Mm-hmm. And I've written 2 books on it, America on the Brink, The Next Added 100 Million Americans, which describes the results of us if we continue on our current path to add 100 million, actually 138 million more people.
Yeah.
Virtually 100 million will be immigrants.
Yes.
And I wrote another one called Immigration's Unarmed Invasion, Deadly Consequences. So you can see I'm 70 years old, and I'm immersed in what is coming. I've seen what's coming, and I am intending to help enough people understand what's coming so that we can change course. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I really, really appreciate the energy and enthusiasm, that you're bringing. You've got more energy than most 20-year-olds, I think, and that's that's an inspiration for me. And you've wrote a number of series on various topics, and the one that you provided me with, I think it's a 10-part series with where you go through different quotes from various scholars and doctors and so on. And the first part of the series is from the Nobel Laureate Dr. Henry Kendall. And if you don't mind, I'll read the quote that you provided me, and maybe you can discuss that.
Yes.
So, Dr. Henry Kendall said, "If we don't halt population growth with justice and compassion, it will be done for us by nature, brutally and without pity, and will leave a ravaged world." That's it's kind of a scary thought there.
Well, it certainly is, and I would really encourage everyone that's listening to this program. You don't have to take my word for it or the numbers that I will bring to you. There are other authors out there. There's an author named Dave Foreman who wrote The Man Swarm and the Killing of Wildlife. And he is absolutely brilliant in that we're losing about 250 species each year here in the United States to extinction because of the human onslaught on habitat, because the United States adds about 3.1 million per year net gain. Yeah. So that's also, there's another study by the Oxford University Norman Myers, whom I've heard his lectures and read his work. We're losing 100 species every day, planet-wide, mostly in the rainforest because they're all being cut down.
Yeah.
And so these books also play into this Nobel Laureate Dr. Henry W. Kendall's quote, leaving the world a ravaged world.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. That's one of the things that I like to often say on the podcast, Frosty, is that we don't want anybody to believe anything we say. We can only tell you what our experiences are and the stuff that we have come across and learned. We can only plant the seeds and provide you with some of that information so that you can go away and do your own research. We're not here to push anything. We just want to lay some stuff out there that we've found to be the truth. And if you can, go away, do your own research and come to the same conclusions, I think, it'll help motivate you to take your own actions. So I think that's just an important point to make, is that we don't want anybody to believe anything we're saying. We want you to do your own research. There's enough belief in this planet as it is. But what you're telling us here is something to be listened to, and thank you.
Well, you're most welcome. And again, I would encourage every person to look up every number and every statement that I make to make sure that you discover that I am giving facts and figures not only from the United Nations, not only from the U.S. Census Bureau, not only from the Pew Research Center, which are all top organizations, but I'm also giving you experience of having ridden a bicycle across 6 continents, also studied and worked and reported on some of the finest research in Antarctica. I lived there for 6 months and worked with top scientists, and that was 20 years ago. And with that 20 years ago, I got to see the climate change models back then. And so we'll go over that part of what I call catastrophic climate destabilization in this series. And more than the misnomer of global warming, we really have to get down to the reality that we are cooking up the oceans with a carbon footprint from our 94 million barrels of oil being burned every day, 24/7, year in and year out, decade in, decade out. And then, of course, the consequences of all that particulate and all those carbon molecules going into the oceans, warming the oceans, and then creating such things as Katrina or Sandy or the Haiyan typhoon and so forth. So once you start to take all these facts and you take all this understanding and you take all this learning and you really drill it into your understanding, you will then get to know what I know. And then when you get to know what I know and what Henry Kendall knows from this quote, you can then take action. We are a cognitive species. We have a choice and we have a chance to change course. And that's why we're bringing this to you today. And this series will be very important. Maybe it will spur thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. In the end, I hope millions of people here in America and around the world to take action. Does that sound pretty reasonable to you, Dalton?
It sounds great. And I think part of the problem, Frosty, is, over the last 20 or 30, maybe more 20 years, with TVs and computers and computer games and all these distractions, we've really removed ourselves from the reality of what's going on. And then you add in, the misinformation that is put out there. It's been really difficult for people to really grasp and make the right decisions whenever they really don't know what's going on. So, I think our job is to really try our best to pass on accurate information and provide, links and so forth that people can follow up on and find this, learn from this themselves. But going ahead, where do we start with this?
Well, I'd like to start with this. This is a series on overpopulation in America. This can also be applied to all over the world. To give you some numbers, you can check these out. The United States right now is around 328 million people. And it, of course, is growing by around 3.1 million plus per year. And I'll give you those numbers and I'll give you the sources. And it will end up that we are going to grow from the year of 2006, when we reached 300 million people. And by the way, that was driven by mass immigration created by the 1965 Immigration Reform Act that started dumping about 1.2 to 1.5 million people into America annually. And then before that, it was like 175,000, sometimes around 200,000. And so we really mistakenly created a nightmare, because back in 1965, there were only 3.5 billion people on the planet. Well, the Western countries, like America, like Canada, like Europe, like Australia, like New Zealand, all chose to have 2 children or less per woman. And so all of these Western countries have come to balance with population. And then unfortunately, because of the 1965 Immigration Reform Act here in the United States, we started multiplying. And that's where we went from 194 million people back in 1965 to 300 million people by 2006, just 40 short odd years later. And now we're still on that same course, but we're also adding a massive illegal immigration. And so right now we take in a minimum of 1.1 million people. And some years it's 1.2 million, but we'll just go with the 1 million figure. And you can study that at numbersusa.org or pewresearchcenter.org or the Fogel-Martin population projections for America. And you can also look at the U.S. Census Bureau. These are facts that we're facing. So
not only do we have a consistent increase in our own population here in America by the American people themselves, we also have a great number of economic, let's say, migrants coming to this country as well, which would be illegal economic migrants. So you're dealing with a number of people here coming here who aren't really cultured to to the American culture, and that creates its own problems in itself. Is that right?
Well, yes, and we can go over the sociological impacts of the projected 100 million immigrants from 190 different countries around the world at some other part in this series or another part in another series.
Yeah.
But let me make this clear. 1 million people are added to the USA, virtually 100,000 every 30 days. And we're also, those million and their immigrants also add 900,000 babies every year. Immigrants add 900,000 babies. So that's 1.9 million, okay? 1.9 million. And then you have the American, it's called population momentum. Even though the average American woman has only 2 children per family, per woman, we're still having so many women are having those 2 kids that we're adding 1 million ourselves, net gain. So that comes out to 2.9 million people. 2.9 million people added. And then according to the Dr. Steve Camarata of CIS, Center for Immigration Studies.org, CIS.org, Dr. Stephen Camarata, he has estimated from his recent research that the illegal alien migrant flow has jumped back up to 500,000 per year. 500,000 per year. And that's been going on for the last 4 years. And before that, it was somewhere around 400,000 per year. At some time, Time magazine back 15 years ago estimated 2 million per year. So you can see that there's a lot of desperation out there around the world. But if you take 2.9 million plus another 500,000, that's 3.4 million per year.
Yeah.
So now you take 3.4 million, that's net gain. That's over deaths.
Yeah.
That's over anybody leaving. So you take that from year 2006, and you will take those numbers, you will get a number of going from 300 million in 2006 to 438 million people put in the United States by 2050, which is only 33 years from now. And if you project that out with the same numbers, we will have in excess of 625 million people here in the United States before the end of the century.
Yeah.
Now, to give you a graphic of this, go to numbersusa.org and look at a 5-minute video called Immigration, Gumballs, and Poverty. And it's by Roy Beck. He's a colleague of mine, and it just shows you the simple math whereby the third world keeps choosing, and they added another 3.5 billion people to the planet from the year 1965, so that we now have 7.3 billion people. And the third world simply refuses to use birth control and or any family planning, and so they keep multiplying, and yet they're the ones that are flooding over into the first world countries.
Can we talk about, sorry to interrupt you, can we talk about what that means, if you're adding, or doubling a population, like we're, predicting will happen here in America over the next, 40 or 50 years. What does that mean for the infrastructure? It puts a tremendous amount of pressure on the society, doesn't it?
Well, you would be correct, and I cover that in this series. What we're facing is acute water shortages, and right now, in the United States, 7 states are facing water shortages. I can name them for you. Florida, and of course, Florida right now has 18 million people, and it is predicted and projected because of mass immigration to reach 36 million by 2050. Okay, and then Texas has got about 26 million. They'll hit 36 million. And they already have water shortages. New Mexico has severe water shortages. Georgia is got water shortages. Of course, Arizona's got water shortages. Nevada's got water shortages. And California has acute water shortages along with Arizona. And yet, Arizona is going to add around 3 to 5 million people. And California is on tap because of mass immigration. They add 1,655 people every day, net gain to California. 98% of them are immigrants, both legal and illegal. And California is on course to hit 58 million, in other words, from 38 million today to 58 million within 30 years. So you see something's got to give. And of course, the water shortages, then you start talking about the energy shortages, which I've got a book right here. It's called Peak Everything by Richard Heinberg, Waking Up to the Century of Declines. This book in my hand right now talks about the exhaustion of the global oil supply, the exhaustion of coal, the exhaustion of natural gas. And so then if you don't have an exhaustion, you have a complete biosphere breakdown because of so much carbon footprint. So now you're starting to get a feeling of what I'm really moving toward here. The more you know, the more you want to understand so that you can take action. And that's the key here, because this is not fantasy. These things are going to happen to the United States. These numbers will land on our heads. Canada is on course to add another 10 million. Europe will add 10 million. In fact, UK is supposed to add 11 million within 2 decades. And in the UK, the United Kingdom, the great, British Empire, Great Britain, is an island, and it's more like Easter Island. And I know most of you who are listening tonight know what Easter Island's all about and its carrying capacity and how it collapsed and the whole story of that. Well, the same thing will happen to all advanced and or industrialized nations as they run out of water, run out of arable land, and then you see run out of the energy to power them, and then the resources. And I've got a book called Scarcity also that I've reported on. We're running out of the materials to even create a battery.
Yeah.
We don't have the zinc. We're almost at exhaustion level for half of the 80 different minerals and metals that actually make these first world countries grow.
It seems like we're in a vicious cycle. It's the more people that are on the planet or that come to this country, for example, we're trying to keep up with that. We create more hydro plants, more coal plants, more petroleum plants, and all of that really just adds to the problem, because now you're polluting the environment more, and the snowball just keeps getting bigger and getting worse.
That's exactly correct. And again, Henry Kendall, he's a Nobel Laureate, but he's not the only one. There's the Club of Rome, which has 1,000 scientists who have said the same thing, that the human race can't keep growing. And so as we run through this series, I want you to really capture the big picture. Mm-hmm. The big picture is irreversible consequences and unsolvable problems. Because does anybody here think that a little country like Bangladesh, okay, let's look at Bangladesh. Bangladesh has 157 million people in a landmass less than the size of Iowa, the U.S. state of Iowa. Can you imagine? That's almost half the U.S. population, and they all exist under horrific water contamination, air contamination, food shortages, and human misery on a level that no one in this country knows. And if you saw it like I saw it, you would cringe that we're going in the same direction.
Yeah, some people will come and say, if I bring up the issue of overpopulation with somebody and I say, look, we can't keep increasing our numbers on the planet, the resources aren't there or available, and they might turn around and say, oh, you're a Nazi, you just want to kill off all these people, and it's just so unreasonable, because they're really not looking into the facts and the major problems that increasing their numbers has on a certain geographical area or the planet as a whole. I mean, like you're just laying out there in Bangladesh, and it's such a small area. You have 150 million people. What are some of the arguments that you've heard against controlling our population numbers, Frosty?
Well, the arguments are, and of course, there's so many arguments that come from those who are very religiously based.
Right.
The Pope in the Vatican in Italy there, completely out of touch with reality. He wants us to be more environmentally responsible, but he refuses to endorse birth control.
Yeah.
The Muslim religion is the same. Even the Christian religion in so many areas is totally out of touch with 21st century reality. And here's the reality that we're all going to face. And Henry Kendall said it right there, that Mother Nature will do it brutally and without pity. And if you think Nazis are bad, I guarantee you Mother Nature is even worse than the Nazis because she's merciless. She is without consciousness. She just simply will starve to death people. And right now, this is a fact. Go look it up on the United Nations starvation charts. That 10 million children starve to death every year and 8 million adults. That's verifiable. That's worldwide right now. That's 18 million people in 2017 that are going to starve to death this year as we commence with 2017. So when some people come up with, well, we got to have immigration because, or we've always been an immigration country, and if you don't accept that, then you're a racist, a xenophobe, and a nativist. Well, I'm a mathematician. I'm a scientist. I am a bicycle rider who's gone through the world on the bicycle. I've studied with the top scientists in Antarctica. All of these arguments are emotional. Xenophobe, racist, and so forth, Nazi, whatever you want to call them, they have no validity when it comes to sustainability.
Yeah,
and you can cry all you want, you can make all the name calling you want, but if you don't have a glass of water to drink, and you don't have food to eat, you don't have a toilet to use, and you don't have an environment to live in, or you don't have quality of life or standard of living, then you're living in India, or you're living in Bangladesh, or you're living in Mexico.
Yeah.
And you can't escape that. So who are you going to call a name to after you are? What if you are? I wish I could take every American and every European and every Canadian for just a 2-week trip through India or even in Bangladesh. Not much difference. And you will see human misery that cannot be changed. You'll see that it cannot be solved. You will see that there's no way to make any solutions. The Ganges River is a cesspool.
Yeah.
This is a fact. Look it up on Indian News or Indian Express News. 60.4%. Look at. I hope you're listening right now. Go onto your computer. 60.4% of citizens of India do not have a toilet.
So where do we go with this in America, Frosty? Where do we, when we start to think that, there's this possibility from today onward that, if we don't start making changes, this is where we're headed, for our own country here. What can we actively begin to do,
Well, the first thing anyone can do is start joining organizations that I represent that are taking action on behalf of our children of the future. And the key here is to collectively empower yourself. And by that, you join organizations that understand exactly what you understand. And they're very balanced and they are very humane. And the first one right now has almost 7 million members and is called www.numbersusa, NUMBERSUSA.org. And I would ask anyone and everyone to go to that website and download 2 videos. One of them is 5 minutes long. It's called Immigration, Gumballs, and Poverty. Roy Beck shows through just sheer gumballs in these big jars how fast the world is adding more people. The third world is adding all of these 80 million net gain per year, 1 billion net gain per every 12 years. And then we're going to add 3 billion before the end of the 2050. And it's unsustainable. It just means more people are going to die, more people are going to collapse, more countries are going to be absolutely unable to save themselves. And so the key here is you join, and then you get to write these letters that are already pre-written to your congressmen and your senators and the president saying, we want to reduce massive reduction of all immigration into this country. Numbers set calls for about 200,000 per year. I, of course, have called for zero immigration because we can't sustain it. You can't sustain exponential growth. The second organization is called capsweb.org, CAPSWEB.org. It's a national, international organization headed by Joanne Weidman. It's brilliant. It's Californians for Population Stabilization. It just states it right there. We've got to stabilize population if we're going to survive the 21st century as an intact civilization. Another one is by David Durham, and he's in California. It's called www.carryingcapacitynetwork.org. And the key here is these are all free. You can give some money if you want, but you can do it for free, and you can send in all of these extraordinary faxes that are already pre-written for you. You can add a little PS to them. And the key is that you will then start making impact instead of just sitting there complaining or watching the stuff go by. Mm-hmm. And there's other ones besides them. There's alipac.us. There's certainly grassfire.com. There's thesocialcontract.com. But you get into those, and you will then start really taking action. You'll be making a difference, and that is the key here. Because I'm sure right now, many of you listening, every one of you listening, you have been sobered just by the first 35 minutes of this presentation. Wouldn't you say so, Delta?
I would say so. It's what gets me is, why is there such a brick wall when it comes to trying to discuss this? Why do our politicians and the leaders just totally avoid talking about this? It's my understanding that there's quite a few of these environmentalists understand the issue of overpopulation, yet they won't go near it with a 10-foot pole.
Well, that's correct. The Sierra Club, which I was a member of because I love John Muir, I was a member of the Sierra Club for over 30 years. But then they just absolutely refused to talk about immigration because they got paid millions of dollars to make sure they didn't talk about immigration, which was the prime driver of the U.S. population crisis. So I quit them. You also have massive corporations that want more growth, that think totally differently and don't understand what everyone here has just found out in the last 35 minutes, and that is there are people at the highest corporate levels who simply don't understand exponential growth, the factor of exponential growth. They don't understand peak oil or peak water. They don't understand the limitations of resources. They don't understand the quality of life or standard of living degradation. They don't understand the biosphere starting to collapse under the humongous overload of 94 million barrels of oil burning every day. So they push it. They push immigration. They push growth because they make more consumption, more production. And at this point, they can get away with it. But at some point, of course, you can't get away with it. But they don't care. And so the key is that people like us, like yours truly, or like Roy Beck, like Joanne Weidman, like Dr. Diana Hall, like Paul Ehrlich, like Jack, you can go to Jack Alpert, who's a Stanford University graduate, a brilliant man, a mathematician. He has 4 videos. You watch those videos and you'll see everything I'm talking about. You can go to his website, www.skil.org. Once you start putting this together, I can tell you this, it's like the toothpaste out of the tube. Your brain will never be able to go back and hide inside of apathy or cognitive dissonance. Mm-hmm. You will now be a person that knows, understands, and then you start thinking about your children, and you want to take some action. And so those are some of the things you can do right now. And my goal, I would like to speak at every college. I would like to speak at every state house in front of the entire senates and houses of every state. I'd like to be on 60 Minutes. I'd like to be on NPR in front of Charlie Rose right there around that table that he speaks to all these people. I'd like to be on NBC, ABC, CBS, because what I have to offer, you cannot refute. You cannot refute it with motions. Well, you can with emotions, but you can't refute it with facts and figures and the reality of what we face as a species. And so that's what I'd like to do. And if anybody's out there listening has the ability to help me get on 60 Minutes, let's have at it. Yeah. Because as you can tell, I am a person who speaks squarely. You can tell the reality that I'm speaking. You can feel the certitude in my voice. I know what I'm talking about. This is not going to go away unless we change course by our choices.
Yeah, and I could say that I know you're not doing it for to be. You're not doing it to be a celebrity. You're not looking to
Nope.
be, you're not looking to make money out of this. There's no money
Nope.
to be made whenever you talk about overpopulation or immigration. It's just something that you're truly passionate about and worried about, and that's where your incentive comes from. You're worried about this planet and the future of the kids that are going to inhabit this place.
Well, that's correct. I mean, I'm a regular middle American. I make enough money to get my life down the road. I wish I had if I had Bill Gates' money, I would buy advertising on every TV and radio station across the country to drive the population issue to the forefront of the American people. I would have ads, I would have videotapes, I would have everything going across Facebook and Twitter and all of these other social medias to drive this issue to the forefront of the American people, because this is the single greatest issue facing America and the rest of the citizens on the planet in the 21st century. And as Henry Kendall said in this first part, either we solve it gracefully and with justice and compassion, or Mother Nature is going to brutally and without pity, without mercy, is going to leave this world a ravaged planet. And that's the facts.
Yeah,
and so that's why I'm so passionate about this.
And I think we're already seeing the effects of that. You have a country here that's divided, culturally divided, and at each other's throats. I think this election year has been, the craziest on record. I haven't lived here all of my life. I moved from Ireland, but speaking to many people that have seen every election, they said this has just been absolutely crazy. And I think, whenever you talk about overpopulation, how can you tie that into what you're seeing on the world scene here? I think it all comes down to just the world is overpopulated. We're all fighting for resources. We're fighting for oil in the Middle East. This is all a result of too many people on the planet, I think.
Well, yeah, let me I can go into the sociological aspect, and that will really sober a lot of people up. But here's one reality. This is by the geologist Walter Youngquist, and he's absolutely brilliant. And he said, and I'm quoting, "This is going to be an interesting decade, for the perfect storm is brewing. Energy, immigration, and oil imports. China grows in direct confrontation for the remaining oil. I think the USA is on a big, slippery downhill slope. Will the thin veneer of civilization survive?" And he says, "Beyond oil, population is the number one problem of the 21st century, for when oil is gone, as we know and use it today, and it will be gone in this century, population will still be here," unquote. You see, there's no way to keep planting food or have water if you can't suck it out of the aquifers, and you don't have enough arable land when you add, again, this 138 million by 2050. But on the sociological front, just open your mind right now and have this appreciation. The United States is fractured more than it's ever been since the Vietnam War. And what happened is, since the Vietnam War, we added 100 million immigrants to this country from 190 different countries with 190 different cultures, 190 different worldviews. And we also have 190 different languages. Here in Denver, Colorado, where I was teaching school, we have 173 different languages in the Denver public schools. You have 800 languages spoken in New York City, and almost 40% of New York City is foreign-born. So you now have another 100 million people coming in the next 30 years from 190 different countries. So that's 190 different worldviews, different religions, different languages, and different cultures and different ethos. You ask yourself, with everybody pulling in the direction of their own ethos, and I'll have to single out the Muslims that come into all these first world countries. They're bringing a 6th century religion into a 21st century culture in a 21st century country. Look what's happening to Europe.
Yeah.
Look what's happening to places like Canada. Look what's happening with the terrorist attacks in Australia. And look at the terrorist attacks here in America. Just a couple of weeks ago, a week ago, Fort Lauderdale, a Shia, some Muslim kid turned into a Muslim from the army, and he just shot people cold blood and shot another 8 that lived. So what you're seeing is fracturing and fragmenting of our country to a point where we're not going to have any sense of balance anymore, because no one is American anymore. They're from someplace else, and all ethnic groups attempt to dominate. And you're seeing that happening right here in our country right now. And so we have to ask ourselves, do we want to turn our country into somebody else's country? Because that's what's happening. It's America is becoming everybody else's country. As a matter of fact, here's one quote. This is by Omar Ahmad, the director on the Council of American Islamic Relations. It's called CAIR, C-A-I-R. He said, and I quote, "Islam isn't in America to be equal to any faith, but to become dominant. The Quran should be the highest authority in America, and Islam the only accepted religion on earth," unquote. When you start hearing that kind of thing, you have to understand that these people are not assimilating into the American way of life. They have no intention of becoming Americans, but in fact, their intention is to become the dominant ethos. And that means the rest of us have to start taking the back seat. Now, I would add this. Any culture that will not defend itself against displacement through mass immigration faces extinction. That includes both time-tested and successful cultures. Embracing diversity results in cultural suicide. America's multicultural path guarantees its destruction via cultural clashes and conflict with Islam, Mexican, and African cultures that diametrically oppose American culture. The more diverse a country, the more destructive and broken down its future. The more people, the more it destroys its quality of life and standard of living. The more it adds immigrants, the more destruction to its own environment. The more it imports refugees, the faster America, Canada, Europe, and Australia lose their own ability to function. Exponential growth of any civilization leads to ultimate collapse. You see it in Africa, India, and China today. You will see it in Europe, Canada, Australia, and America in the coming years if Western countries don't stop all forms of immigration, unquote.
Yeah. It seems very naive of us. Our cultures, our various cultures, evolve over thousands of years, and it seems very naive of us to think that we can just in the period of a couple of years or a few months to integrate large numbers of vastly different cultured people into a society. It seems just crazy. People. It's definitely a subject that people don't like to talk about. It's a complicated subject.
Here's another quote that I think is very important. It was by the General Counsel of the United States Immigration and Naturalization Service, James Walsh, and he said, and I quote, and this was 1991, "Immigrants devoted to their own cultures and religions are not influenced by the secular, politically correct facade that dominates academia, news media, entertainment, education, religious, and political thinking today." He said, "These immigrants claim the right not to assimilate, and the day is coming when the question will be how can the United States regulate the defiantly unassimilated cultures, religions, and mores of foreign lands. Such immigrants say their traditions trump the U.S. legal system. Balkanization of the United States has begun," unquote. Well, that's pretty sobering because we already have beheadings here in the United States. They're called honor killings. I've got dozens of examples. We now have terror in the United States created by these Muslim immigrants. We have female genital mutilation, which is an Islamic, literally neuterizing and cutting the sexual being out of a woman. But that is over 250, 300,000 cases in the United States right now from that. We have women coming over here and they're still wearing a burqa and hijabs because their men literally will violently push them into place because that's what the Islamic men do. They literally, women are their property. That's not changing just because they came to America. But in fact, as you saw from the quote earlier, They're trying to do everything they can to dominate and install Sharia law into the United States, which diametrically opposes women's rights, gay rights, human rights, free speech, and everything we hold dear in this country. Do I make sense on that?
Yeah, that makes sense. I fear that we've already passed the tipping point. I think that the pendulum is already coming back.
I respect all races, all countries, all ethnic groups, all colors, because everybody's doing the best they can. But when you start putting multiple languages into a society, you start having worldviews and concepts that are diametrically opposed to the host society. And it can't succeed. It's been proven time and time again. To give you an example, 40 years ago, Lebanon was known as the jewel of the Mediterranean, the Switzerland of the Mediterranean. And in the last 40 years, they've immigrated themselves literally into the nightmare that they are today. The Muslims are taking over. They're in total violence, and women have no more rights anymore. This is all literally the result of mass immigration. If you look at Vancouver, Canada right now, yes, the Chinese are a beautiful culture. I've traveled all over China. But guess what? They're growing by 8 million net gain per year, even with one child per woman. They're exploding beyond their carrying capacity. They're buying land in South America and in the Middle East. They're eating up resources. The human race burns 94 million barrels of oil every day right now. And the projections are, according to James Howard Kunstler in the Long Emergency, China, adding 27 million cars every year net gain, will be burning 98 million barrels of oil by 2030. That's only 13 years from now. Mm-hmm. So you can see, and what's happening in Vancouver, the Chinese have not only taken a foothold in Vancouver, Canada, they are now the dominant people, and all the signage is in Chinese. And the Chinese are in total control, and the Canadians have been run out. Well, that's the kind of thing that happens with ethnic groups, because they all vie for dominance. And once their numbers become too great, such as what's happening in Minneapolis, Minnesota right now, you've got Somaliland up there with all the Somalians. You've got Detroit, Michigan with Hamtramck and Dearborn, and now becoming completely Muslim. And they're practicing Muslim everything, nothing American.
Why do you think it's got to this point? Why has it been, who's let this happen?
What? This started in '65 with Howard Metzenbaum and Teddy Kennedy, the senator, and Jacob Javits, and they said it was called the 1965 Immigration Reform Act. Either they didn't have an idea of the nightmare that they had created, but nobody has the courage to stop it. And that's why it's got to be us. This is a constitutional republic, and if we don't stop it by our actions, by taking and getting involved, and you go to those websites that I just mentioned, then we simply are going to see this thing continue, and the onslaught will continue. And again, 110, 120,000 immigrants come into this country every 30 days. That means they take your jobs, they use your welfare, they're on your back, they're using food stamps, they're using Section 8 housing, they're taking your job or they're not taking your job, they're undercutting the wages of your job, and nowadays all of the jobs in America are starting to get roboticized. And so people who don't get through high school, and even if they get through high school, don't have enough specialty and education to do a job, so the robots are taken over or the immigrants are taken over. And that's what's causing the middle class to sink down into the new poor class. I mean, and the numbers back me up on this. We have not had any rise in wages in America now for over 20 years. They just forced some new ones in the last election. But anybody think they can live on $8, $9, $10 an hour? You can't. Yeah. To live a decent life, you got to have something around $20 an hour.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the north of Ireland, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the politics or the religious difficulties we had there. But we're.
I'm little. I've watched it over the years. Yeah. The IRA and everything else.
Yeah, and I mean, you couldn't tell us apart. Frosty, we look the same, we talk the same,
But some are Catholics and some are Protestants.
But yet, because you had that religious difference, Catholic and Protestant, look at the turmoil that caused just, from a slight difference in, belief in Christianity. It's crazy. Now you look at the vastly different belief systems that you're trying to integrate here, and it just creates a whole load of problems, it seems.
It's obviously, when you had the IRA and you had the Protestants against the Catholics in Ireland there, what a tragedy. All part of the Christian religion, all part of Jesus Christ, all part of one belief, all believing in the same Bible.
Yeah.
But then you had Martin Luther, had Luther change that and turn into the Protestants, and then change, against the Catholics and all that went with that. And then you think of introducing a religion of the Quran, whose prime directive is to, and this is a quote, is to convert or kill all non-believers, unquote. That's in the Quran.
Yeah.
And so you have that kind of religion popping into a country, you're going to have some really big troubles, really big problems. And you've seen those big troubles at 9/11, you've seen them at the Boston Marathon, you've seen them at Orlando, you've seen them at San Bernardino, Fort Hood, Chattanooga, you've seen them at Ohio State University, you just saw them at Fort Lauderdale last week. Somebody is going to be another victim at the next Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, or San Bernardino event here in America, because it is coming as surely as the dawn. As a matter of fact, the more Muslims in a country, the more you're going to have events like this, and literally there's no way to escape it. There's no way to escape that kind of consequence when you keep inviting it into the country. And that's essentially what we've done. We're just inviting in more and more of it. And I don't, here's another quote that I think is very important. It's by Garrett Hardin. He was a social scientist. He said, "Diversity within a nation destroys unity and leads to civil wars. Immigration, a benefit during the youth of a nation, can act as a disease in its mature state. Too much internal diversity in large nations has led to violence and disintegration." Lebanon, for an example. "We are now in the process of destabilizing America. The magic words of destabilizers are diversity and multiculturalism," unquote. I mean, these are some of the top guns that are saying this. That's not me speaking. That's somebody that's top gun. And here's another one by journalist Daniel Green. "When you turn on the evening news and see a running death toll, it's happening more and more often. The new brand of Islamic terror only needs one thing: Muslims. Lone wolf terrorism operates off the existing Muslim population in a particular country. The bigger the Muslim population, the bigger the risk. The FBI or other law enforcement agencies cannot monitor even a fraction of the Islamic settler population sympathetic to terror. As the Muslim settler population in a country increases, the number of terrorist events grow." Our arrogance as a cognitive species goes beyond reason, it goes beyond rationality, it goes beyond understanding, because in the end, no matter how intelligent we are subject to the nature's laws. We're subject to clean water. If you look at right now, in the last 20 years, autism has grown in the United States from 1 in 20,000 live births. Now it's 1 in 88. Is there a connection there, folks?
There has.
You better believe it.
Yeah.
Monsanto is poisoning the world with the GMOs, the genetically modified organisms. 90+% of all your corn, which is fed to all your cows, is now GMO corn. You've got all of these chemicals. Roundup has killed 90% of the butterflies, the monarch butterflies in California in the last 30 years or 20 years. You're poisoning the oceans with 70,000 different kinds of chemicals. Roundup, atrazine, glyphosates. I could go right on down the line because I've written about these myself. I did an 8-part series on GMOs in the world.
Yeah, that's what I'd love to talk about too.
Yeah, we could talk about that. And so you wonder why all of these kids are coming up with autism. You wonder why there's so much disease going on when it never was before. And it has to do with the fact that we're chemicalizing the biosphere. I mean, 70,000 chemicals are rained down from the sky and in the water and on the land every day, 24/7. And they're now bioaccumulating. And the more they bioaccumulate, it's like the plastics. The plastics are now getting into the food chain of the oceans. They're not only killing off literally millions of marine animals every year, but they're also, the plastic that does break down is getting into the tissue of the fish, the tissue of the birds, and killing the birds, killing the fish, and everybody's feeding on that, and then we're feeding on it. If you look at Fukushima, 3 years ago, Fukushima exploded with trillions of gallons of radioactive water waste going into the Pacific Ocean. Well, guess what? That Pacific Ocean is now translated and flowed into every nook and cranny on the planet, so that all of that chemical radiation and radiated waters is now being circulated through the gills of fish and in the fish food chain. We also, I remember 50 years ago, nuclear waste, over 555-gallon drums were dumped off 20 miles off of San Francisco. Just let it go. Well, all those 555-gallon drums all broke loose, and they're all empty now. That's been frozen. After World War II, lucite, which was like mustard gas, worse than mustard gas and lucite. Go look up mustard gas dumps on the internet, and you'll see where the U.S. dumped it in the Pacific and in the Gulf of Mexico and in the Atlantic, right off of like Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, you name it. And then the Russians did the same thing. I'm telling you, we're poisoning the world at an astronomically high rate of speed, and you add another billion people every 12 years, you're going to see some unbelievable consequences as to cancers. And folks, cancer is the #1 killer in the world. It kills more people than anything else. How do you think cancer got to be so prolific? Well, because we're eating and ingesting and breathing so many poisonous materials that it creates literally a malfunction in the cell's DNA, and then the cancer itself starts to proliferate because the cells are not healthy. And that's what we're doing to ourselves. So as you can see, when you see this big picture that I've drawn for you in the last hour, it's pretty sobering. And either we do something about it, or it will be done to us.
Yeah, and we're definitely seeing that. It just seems to be getting worse and worse. And, you know, I hate to be somebody that, is constantly talking about the dim and gloom, but, you know, it's just something that needs to be talked about, you know, and if we don't, we're just not going to be able to grasp the reality of it, you know. Well, Frosty, it's been an absolutely insightful hour, and I really appreciate your time. We kind of, you know, went down many avenues there. You're a man full of knowledge and full of wisdom. I'd love to sit down with you again, you know, maybe in the next few weeks, and we can, you know, touch on the second part of your series.
That sounds great. I'm ready to come on. And if anybody wants to connect or contact you, of course, my website's frostywooldridge.com. I want you to know I'm a fun kind of guy. I went skiing yesterday. I worked out this morning. I bicycled this morning. And I love life. I went to the movies last night. I go dancing with my wife. I want every human being of every race and color and ethnic group to enjoy the same thing in their own country, in this country. And if you have questions, my fun website is howtolivealifeofadventure.com. And you'll see a lot of my books on that website, and you'll see my serious books on the frostywooldridge.com website. And ask me questions. I'll answer all of your questions. I am a dedicated man with high enthusiasm and extraordinary energy to help us move toward a thriving and sustainable future here in the United States, but also worldwide. And again, my goal, my intention, is to create a national, international debate discussion on population stabilization for the human race, get all of the countries together, get all the leaders together, get all of the environmental people together, and let's move the human race toward a sustainable future in the 21st century.
Oh, that's a perfect note to leave it on, Frosty. Well, folks, thanks very much for joining us today for this episode of Document Truth. It's been certainly sobering to talk about, and I hope you'll join us on the next episode in a few weeks from now when Frosty will join us for part 2 of his 10-part series on overpopulation in America. Thanks again, Frosty, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much.